and welcome back to another episode of 10-Minute Concert Insights, Schubert Club's version of the pre-concert lecture. My name is Mark Bilyeu, and it is a joy to share just a few minutes together, exploring another outstanding concert presented by the Schubert Club. This time featuring the cellist Pablo Ferrández, described by the LA Times as a cello phenomenon and one of the most in-demand instrumentalists of his generation. For this concert, he has selected an all-unaccompanied cello works program, offering an opportunity for us to experience this incredible music and musician distilled down to its very core. Now, when I say unaccompanied cello suites, I bet dollars to donuts you'd respond with Bach. And so would I. But if we were having this conversation at the turn of the 20th century, I'd say unaccompanied cello suites, and you'd say, huh? We have largely the Catalan cellist Pablo Casals to thank for that. You see, Bach's music wasn't published and disseminated in the same way that, say, Brahms and Beethoven's music was. Bach had no publisher and wrote music that was often meant for private, if not solely liturgical consumption. So, in 1890, about 150 years after we believe Bach penned his cello suites, a 13-year-old Pablo Casals was walking through the streets of Barcelona with his father. As Casals described it years later, together we set off on the search. For two reasons, I shall never forget that afternoon. First, my father bought me my first full-size cello. How proud I was to have that wonderful instrument. Then we stopped at an old music shop near the harbor. I began browsing through a bundle of musical scores. Suddenly, I came upon a sheaf of pages crumpled and discolored with age. They were unaccompanied suites by Johann Sebastian Bach, for the cello only. I looked at them with wonder. 6 suites for violoncello solo? What magic and mystery, I thought, were hidden in those words? That scene has never grown dim. Well, what Casals found was an edition of the suites by Friedrich Wilhelm Ludwig Grützmacher, the German cellist 1 generation older than Casals. Before this discovery by Casals, the cello suites were seen as simply dull technical studies, if they were seen at all. So Grützmacher took the copy believed to be the closest to Bach's original, a manuscript by his second wife, Anna Magdalena, and he made improvements. He transposed the 6th suite from D to G major, altered rhythms while also changing and adding notes seemingly willy-nilly. In a rather hysterical letter to his publishers, he wrote, "My main purpose has been to reflect and to determine what these masters might have been thinking. I feel I have more right than all others to do this work." Well, Grützmacher's work has since been called every name in the book, from vandalism to unforgivable contributions and a travesty of the composer's work. And that's just from the musicologists. But this isn't about Grützmacher. It's about the work of Pablo Casals and his efforts to disseminate Bach's music, breathing new life into them so that we might know the exceptional music that they are. He also made far less offensive additions. It would take Casals almost 12 years before offering any of these Bach suites for public performance, works that would become synonymous with his own unique brand of artistry. Mieczysław Rostropovich said that, quote, "When Casals played, it seemed to me impossible to interpret Bach in any other way. Such was the force of his personality and his nature as an artist, his total conviction in what he was doing." Well, we'll get to Rostropovich in just a minute. But first, Gaspar Casada. At the age of 21, Pablo Casals heard the 9-year-old Casado play and invited him to become his first full-time student. Casada eventually attained a scholarship from the city of his hometown of Barcelona to move to Paris, where he studied with Casals for many years. While in Paris, he also studied composition with Ravel and de Falla, and began building a career as both virtuoso cellist and composer. Casado considered Casals to be his greatest musical influence, and somebody he called his spiritual father. That was until 1936, when Francisco Franco's forces attacked their shared homeland of Catalonia in the Spanish Civil War. Casals was in the midst of recording the Bach cello suites, the first time anyone had done so. Following this period, Casals boycotted performing in any country that recognized Franco's regime, and Casado, who described himself as apolitical, continued to tour. This caused a major rift between the two, as Casals drew a hard line. Ahead of Casado's second trip to America, Casals sent a now famous letter to the New York Times, dated March 6 of 1949, in which he said, "During the war, Casado made himself a brilliant career in Germany, Italy, and Franco-Spain. Without scruple, he presented himself in America and is received. This is deplorable. The presumption of Casado knows no limit when knowing that I am undergoing exile for having played the opposite card. He uses my name to cover himself. A revolting cynicism. I hope at least that the musicians of America will know how to act in this case. It is not a question of hatred, but one of dignity and justice." Well, when Pablo Casals, the man who gave the world the Bach cello suites, speaks, the world listens. Casado's international tour was canceled, and a recording contract with Columbia was terminated. The two would later reconcile, thanks to the behemoth efforts of Yehudi Menuhin, but the damage had been done to Casado's career. Casado's suite, unaccompanied for solo cello, while Bach-inspired, he no doubt had been introduced to them by his teacher Casals, uses musical language that is all his own, playing homage to his own heroes. He quotes Zoltan Kodai's work for solo cello, and an excerpt from Ravel's Daphnis and Chloe. Casado's student, Marcel Cervera, described the movements as depicting three regions of his home country: Castilla y Mancha, the center of Spain; Catalonia, his home in the northeast; and Andalusia in the south. It was in London of 1960, just 10 years after Casals had penned his letter to the New York Times, that Benjamin Britten first heard the cellist Rostropovich. He was attending the London premiere of Shostakovich's cello concerto, with Rostropovich as the soloist. Britten was sitting next to Shostakovich and apparently bruised his ribcage with how many times he elbowed Shostakovich to remark on the soloist's abilities. Backstage, Shostakovich introduced the two, who immediately hit it off. Their relationship was both professional and personal for the two musicians. I am personally very fond of this photo of Britten, Rostropovich, and their partners, Peter Pears and Galina Vishnevskaya, riding together in a convertible. In total, Britten wrote 5 works for the cellist. His sonata for cello and piano. Here's a photo of the rehearsal of the work at Britten's beloved Aldeburgh, which is known as the Red House. His cello symphony, and 3 unaccompanied suites for cello. The story behind the suites coming into being is amusingly quirky. Rostropovich had never met a real princess, and while they were on tour, they were scheduled to spend a night at Harewood House, home of the Princess Royal. He decided that he must curtsy. Rostropovich had concocted some sort of gymnastic movement, what he called a kilksin, which he was practicing, which would have certainly embarrassed Britten. Over lunch, Rostropovich agreed to quell his acrobatics on one condition: some new works for the cello in exchange for him giving up his kilksin. The contract was drawn up on a printed menu. As Rostropovich recalls, Britten complained afterwards, muttering, "Damned blackmailer." The first suite is the one on our program today. Unlike the Bach suites, which all have 6 movements, Britten crafts a suite with 9. Here we can see that 3 of these are marked canto and are used as introductory and transitional interludes. Removing these, and we see many similarities to those of the dance-inspired Bach suites, which start and end this program. Britten loved to write music for specific musicians, whether it was for his partner, the tenor Peter Pears, the French horn phenom Dennis Brain, or in this suite, we hear a work crafted to meet both the musical and technical pinnacles of the Mount Everest that was Rostropovich. Because of this, much of the cello music by Britten was actually kind of avoided throughout Rostropovich's lifetime. János Starker famously stayed away from these suites, knowing how closely tied to Rostropovich they were. But with the benefit of temporal distance and immense talent, it is an absolute treat to hear Pablo Ferrández offer this program for us here at the Schubert Club. We will see you next time.